I'm going to be talking about time in interactive art. So a little bit about myself. Basically, I started doing interactive full-time at the interactive art full-time starting in 2024. It was a really big, terrifying life choice decision. Most of that's been focused on music responsive lighting, a system that I call Lumitone, which I'm not actually going to be talking about that much. But that's where most of the work that I've been doing for the past year and change has been focused on. Before that, I was in the video game industry for 20 years. One of the co-founders of Demiurge Studios. Most of the things that I did were engineering related, but when it's a small company, you also do sound design and project management and business development and cleaning up the pizza boxes and absolutely everything else. That's a whole other story, but about sort of halfway through my career there, I was like, engineering is cool, but I've done this for a long time. I ended up starting the data science department, and so spent the next 8 years living in R and doing data science and manipulation and things like that, while working closely with all game design aspects of that. So learned a lot. That was a really interesting, different perspective. And then going further back in time, I studied cognitive science and computer science and art in my undergrad, which sort of was just whatever I felt like studying at the time. It turns out this is perfect for what to study if you want to do interactive art. You've got the cognition of how people relate to things and user interfaces and stimuli in general. You've got the coding to make it go, and the art background so that you can bullshit about what it means. So that's sort of where I started. I'm going to talk about time. There's so many different aspects that we could talk about, but every piece of art has a time component. So this is obvious in music and dance and things that take place over time. It's also a really important part of static art, such as paintings, how you approach the painting, what catches your eye, how your eye moves over the piece. All of that, how the user experiences the art in time is as important as how the piece itself moves through time. I also found that, and so it seemed relevant since a lot of people here do interactive related art, that it was something to talk about. It's also one of those parts that I noticed there's a disconnect in some, the art world and the tech world and the user experience world is I wish they talked to each other more. I feel there's, sometimes people go into an interactive art exhibition and they stare at a piece for 20 minutes and they don't understand it and they leave the experience feeling bad and they blame themselves for not getting it. Whereas coming from the game industry, you have approximately 30 seconds to capture somebody's attention before they be this game sucks, and then download it up a different free game. And so spending years working on how do we capture attention, what are the micro progressions through this process. And it's entertainment, it's disposable, people can do whatever they want with the time. And in any of the free-to-play download trial versions of that time is very competitive. You don't have to use it, it's all completely voluntary. And so it's actually very cutthroat in a way that once you've paid to go in a gallery, you're gonna stand there and contemplate pieces for quite a while. And then maybe you're getting it, maybe you've actually totally missed the point. And so I wanted to bring that sort of cutthroat ruthlessness of video games into the art world and see what you could get with applying some of these techniques. So the lenses that I'm going to use here to talk about interactive art are games, user interface design, and cognitive science. It's probably going to be heavier on games than all those others. So time. One of the ways that people talk about this is powers of 10, orders of magnitude, and so I'm going to talk about, and a lot of other people, this is not I'm not parroting or anything, is the first 10 milliseconds, 0.1 seconds, the first second, the first 10 seconds, the first minute, which is a tower of 10, I know it's not exactly, the first 10 minutes and the first hour, and what does it mean to hit all those beats? And also I'm differentiated because I was unhappy with a lot of the existing literature, is that a lot of times people mix up two different concepts. There's the first X amount of time, the first 1 second, 10 seconds, and then there's the core compulsion loops of the repeated 1 second and the repeated 10 seconds. And in games, people talk a lot about okay, how do these loops happen, and user interface design, how long does it take to complete a task, how long does it take to find things, and then also people also talk about how does it land in the first part and tether. So I'm going to try and distinguish between these two timescales exist in both of these. There's the first non-repeatable units of time, and then there's the constantly repeating iterative loops for these moments of time. And I'm going to look at each of these in each of the pieces that I'm going to talk about. For the first part, a lot of that's in games. FTUI stands for first time user experience. Also, people call this onboarding. And the interactive loops, powers of 10 timescales in user experience, has a lot of these timescales. And gameplay loops also talks about like what is the moment to moment, minute to minute, like hour to hour, day to day. How do you move through this? What parts do you do again? How is there progress within loops and things like that? So all of these, I think, actually apply to art pretty well. Cool, so we're gonna start at the 100 milliseconds. This is one of your best chances to engage people. This is where like somebody attempts to interact with it, and then they do something, and then what does it do the second you get interacted? I was actually talking to Steve a bit before this, and I was thinking about including this in my talk and didn't, is the pre-interaction part. How do you draw people in? How do you teach them that they can even try interacting with me? That's a whole other conversation. I decided to drop that part to focus just on like once you've gotten to the piece, what does it start to do? But like the pre-interaction is just as important in many ways. But like once you do this, this is your chance to hook somebody. And it doesn't have to make sense. You just need to show up and it has to do something. Like anything at all, is like flash a light, do this, make a sound, like it needs to respond in some way, and that's good enough at this time scale that we're talking sub-second. And so like that's the first part, talking about the loop part. You first talk about it with games. Games, you can actually, we're gonna first talk about it from cognitive science. People are very sensitive to time, but weirdly cannot respond to things particularly quickly. If you flash a light and say, here's a big button, push the button as soon as you see that light flash, the average response time is about 250 milliseconds. This is a quarter second. From seeing the light turn on to pushing the button, most people don't get much faster. People that are like pro gamers, F1 drivers, those people can respond faster, but like the lowest threshold of like novel stimuli to response is about 100 milliseconds. But people can perceive time and have like pre-recorded actions a lot faster. So like people that are drumming, they're like between all the different hits happen faster than 100 milliseconds. So people can complete tasks with incredibly precise timing faster than they can respond to novel stimuli. And people can tell tiny things. Like I think the smallest amount that people can tell is about 10 milliseconds. And that's mainly auditory. You can hear when beats are off by that much, or notes, like that's the difference between playing something straight and playing something with a bit of a swing, like tiny time differences. Weirdly, your eyes are slower than your ears in terms of processing. And somebody asked me recently about why, and I literally think it's because the occipital lobe that does the processing is in the back of your head, and your eyes are in the front, and that's how long it takes to get to the back of your brain, versus your auditory sensing is right next to your ears, and so you actually have to travel less far, fewer neurons in the way. Yeah.
Like multiplayer.
Yeah. Okay, so basically games are trying to optimize like 33 milliseconds, aka 30 frames a second, is the slowest you want to run anything. And most games before a lot of games now run at 60 frames a second, but before they could do that, a lot of games would render at 30 frames a second and run their input loops at 60 frames a second so that you could get faster input and more responsive timing, even if it didn't always render the next frame. On modern iOS devices, or like any smartphone, like Android, everything like that, people aim for 100 frames a second because scrolling with your finger feels way better when it goes wicked fast. One of the interesting quotes that I got from reading about for this talk was that if the computer responds in more than a tenth of a second, but less than a second, it feels like the computer's doing something, it's like the computer's doing something that you prompted. Whereas if it's less than like 100 milliseconds, well, it's more, if it's on the 33 or less milliseconds, it feels like you're doing something. When you click a menu, you don't think that you talk to the computer and the computer opened the menu. You imagine yourself as, I am opening that menu, I opened the menu, as opposed to like, you push a button and then it did something. And then it's like, oh, I initiated that, but the computer did it. And so like the difference in that timing makes you shift who you are in the projection of this interaction with the technology. So, cool. Now we're going to talk about Street Fighter. So Street Fighter 3 Third Strike is what's on the screen behind me. This game came out in 1999, and I'm showing a clip from the EVO competition in 2004. This competition still exists. It still exists in 2024, which is the last time they had it. It is freaking huge. This game has been around for 25 years, and people are still playing it and getting better. I think part of that is because this game nails every part of the time frames that we're talking about. It's got the sub-second timing, the second timing, the 10-second timing. All of these planning loops are laying on top of each other, adding complexity and depth, so people are still trying to perfect their game 25 years after it came out. So what's going to happen here is we're seeing Ken and Chun-Li are fighting, and it's going to go back and forth for a bit, and then Ken is almost dead, and Chun-Li is going to launch an attack. And if Ken blocks the attack, Ken would lose, because each time you try and block, you still take tiny, tiny bits of damage. And so what this player is going to do off in competition live, it was basically unheard of, is he parries 17 attacks on 100 millisecond timing in a row and then counters. So yeah, now there's like no life left. So any possible damage happens. So there's in the air parry, counter to super. And everybody loses their fucking mind. This is appropriate. Like if you're into fighting games, this is like one of the most iconic like things that anybody pulled off ever. And so like this, I'm talking it because like I still get tingles watching this. I play the game. Okay, so that was really exciting, but like that's the power that like this sort of, how do humans cognitively process things, how fast they can do it, and like how that scales up over time. Cool, now we're getting all the way to 1 second. So this is the point where the system may have responded, but the user takes a moment to realize it. So like you touch something and you're like, oh, it did something. That's like, you start processing that something happened, that you start putting together that it was probably you that made it happen, and you're like, oh, I did that. Like it takes a little bit to like for that realization to take place. And also after that second is up, you're like, oh, I want to try that again. And so all of that like realization that it's probably interactive and the idea to take is like taking place on a second. When you're dealing with second loops, this is like the one-step plan. So like, I want to click on the menu. You have to move your mouse, click the menu, and then watch the menu appear. Like those are things that all happen. It's like not longer than that, but like I am planning on executing a task. And so this is sort of where that lives. It's the point where somebody's invited to try again because they're starting to just realize they have interaction, and it's the time where people can like plan something and execute one part of that plan. Okay, cool. This next piece is called Light Orchestra by Ka-Peng Lee. And it's a Connect-based piece. And I think I can start playing with this. There's Ping, Connect, and there's this giant 30-foot LED wall that's responding to the depth camera here. And so the Connect, this is the V1 Connect, has about a quarter-second lag in terms of zoom. And then add the time that it takes the lights to get to the top. And this is about a one gesture. Where you go like this, is like you get the quarter-second lag from the device, and then you get the time that it travels up to the top, and this is the 1 second loop. Cool, I'm sorry. We'll get to 10 seconds of that, but I didn't want to talk over that. So his piece responds in the sub-second time frame to be like, oh, there's something happening. And then that like sweeping gesture takes about a second from there. Like at that point, you have no idea what's controlling the colors or how the different interactions, you're like, where is the depth? But like the core loop is something that takes place repeatedly over 1-second intervals, and each of them I think is stunning. Like I really like this piece, and watching people discover it and then finding the depth of this, it's like, it teaches you how to use it. And I think a lot of the things that we're going to talk about are by focusing on these tiny time intervals, those are the opportunities to teach people to use things, and like those are the feedback mechanisms you need to have to be really precise, or else it becomes disconnected enough that people don't understand their own agency. So now we're getting to 10 whole seconds. This is where people start to sense depth. And you're like, you do it a little, you do a couple of the same things again, and maybe you try some different things, and then it responds a little bit differently. So it's not just one trick pony. We're like, oh, okay, there's something else going on here.
Sorry, when you say depth, do you mean like physical depth, or do you mean like depth and complexity of what's going on?
Depth of complexity, sorry. Okay. Not, yes. This is where people start to sense depth of complexity, depth of interaction, that there's different types of interaction. And people start probing it about this time. They're like, cool, it did a thing. Does it respond to this? Does it respond to that? And ideally, you want to answer this question in those 10 seconds. You want to say, yes, this does something other than just one thing. And like, because that's amount of people have shockingly short attention spans. I think that people know this until you're working on your own piece, and then you immediately forget that because it's so good and you understand exactly how it works, and you're like, no, everybody's going to totally understand this, and they don't. And so like trying to answer the question what else it does in 10 seconds, I found is like very useful thing to like keep in my head. In terms of loops, it takes about 10 seconds to make a plan, executing multi-step things, and also adjusting to feedback to make new plans. This is like the adjusting to feedback and making new plans, like in a game, is similar to the like, oh, okay, am I gonna probe and try something? So that like these things are related. And yeah, and this is Space Team, which is one of my favorite mobile games ever, because it is complete chaos. It just causes people to shout at each other. If this doesn't sound fun, well, obviously why it's super fun. It basically it presents an incredibly confusing user interface, and then asks and shows on each of the multiplayer screens, it is a local co-op only. So you need other people sitting next to you on their devices, no network, it doesn't work that, it only works in person with multiple phones. And each screen tells you to do something. It tells you to do something that might be on your screen or might be on somebody else's screen. And everybody gets instructions at the same time. And they have the same time frame to do all the instructions at the same. And so it produces interactions like this.
So we're trying to do a massive vote with more than 4 players, and so it doesn't always work. But sector 1.
Okay. No anomalies detected.
That's a bold-faced lie.
Okay.
Turn on pause the shaft.
So yeah, these are how the commands all make sense. They make no more sense than this, and they get more confusing as time goes by.
Distress call. Increase units too.
So basically, like, I love this because it's concurrent 10-second loops all overlapping. You're trying to listen to people and also get other people to do your thing all at the same time.
Spring rim choke.
Anyway, so if you haven't tried that game, it is very good if you like shouting with and at your friends. And it also, I think, captures that, like, okay, this is like you're making plans, and you're making plans, and all you're like, do you look at the UI? Do you try to look at your friends? Do you try to see who's talking over each other? And it's a lot of planning and updating and adjusting. And like, it conveniently takes place, that timer goes like about 10 seconds to how much time you have to like respond to that. Okay, cool. Now we're all the way up to a minute. Within a minute, this basically starts to let you test theories of how things work. Your interaction becomes purposeful after like experimenting for like the 10 seconds chunks. You're like, aha, I'm going to start using this piece as opposed to reacting to this piece. You're like, I am going to like set an intention and try and do something. And this is like where because people are going to try and do something, like having a more purposeful, like this is where I find that like emotional responses can start developing, because when you start playing with intentionality, either with like other participants or yourself, it starts to like feel deeper. For like core loops, This is how long it takes to complete a simple task. When you have fighting games, like a round or match is like 1 to 3 minutes. This is the order of magnitude that we're dealing with. And you can make larger plans in a minute. And for this, this is a piece called Bird Burbs, which I've mainly seen at outdoor festivals. It's adorable. It has these little bird houses, and you ring the doorbells, and then the birds inside the bird houses have a little conversation, so you can see them. It's whimsical, it's delightful, it's not totally clear it's goal-oriented, but you can experiment with it. And as you go around, it's pretty clear once you figure out you can ring a doorbell, what you're gonna do, you go around and ring the doorbells. But there's a lot of different doorbells to ring, and so it takes some time. And after going around the tree and ringing all the doorbells, if you're like, I wonder what happens if you ring all the doorbells at the same time, because there's only so much to do with buttons. And then the entire system freaks out and plays this really loud sound, like bird is the word, and all the lights go crazy, and it's adorable. So it takes about 1 minute for you to figure that out, like on the order of 1 minute. Like, so similar, but like, it's like people are pretty consistent, and you watch them, and you're like, okay, there's like push buttons, and then everybody's like, oh, what if I push all the buttons at the same time? It's like, people are delightfully predictable sometimes when you're making interactive art, and it's something to take advantage of and make them happy, make yourself happy. And so this has like the short time frame intersection of like, push the button, birdhouse lights, responds, you're like, oh, there's another birdhouse, 10 seconds, and you're like, okay, now I've done that, like go around and then get this deeper interaction. This just gets us to 10 minutes. And sort of, this is where you get to the point of surprise. And so if nothing changes, you can start to have things feel repetitive. You're like, okay, you've gotten a minute, you sort of understood what are the parameters, like at that point you might be good. Does it go deeper? Does it not go deeper? What can you explore at this point beyond that? Dealing with like games and things that have screens, you can like consider layering, unlocking different options after you pass stuff. In interactive art, it's a little bit trickier because it depends on so many different things. But yeah, it's about at the 10-minute point where you can sort of like hit or miss the like repetitive or shallow or depth thing. It's also worth noting that like humans sort of on average have a 15 to 20 minute attention span. And so longer than that, like while you can have engagements that are longer than that, people often get like at least micro distracted within that time. But like paying attention to one thing is like, this is about your limit of like human attention span. You can definitely have longer interactions than that, but like when you're thinking about what can be contained all in working memory, like it's about 10 to 15 minutes. It also gives you time to try something and fail and try again. The shorter time frames, it's a little bit harder to do that. And so I'm going to show two totally different pieces. The first is Perfect and Clear by James Turrell. I'm actually wearing my James Turrell shirt now because... oh, awesome! Yeah, cool. So this is at the Mass MoCA. If you haven't been to Mass MoCA, I highly recommend it. It's an amazing space in and of itself, and they also have really good works. And Turrell's work, I think, is still up there. And so this is a room without corners, and it just has some lights and some really interesting depth of light effects, and you go in there for 10 to 15 minutes at a time, and there's like the lights shift and change, and that's it. And it's amazing. It's really interesting to see how well it's done for capturing like the conversations you have with yourself in that much time about like what is color, what is space. It's so monochromatic that you sort of lose a sense of depth and distance, and so you have like you're questioning your own senses in this time, and then as the piece unwinds, you like get to like have this whole conversation with your entire sensory systems, and it's really compelling. Even though it's not interactive in the traditional sense, you can walk around the space, you can get closer to the corners, you can start to see the anomalies, and like you exploring the space as it's like pushing this like very weird stimulus. It's just a color, but it's so uniform, it messes with you. And this exploration and conversation taking place in your own head and with the room takes about 10 minutes. So like that's one of the pieces that I was just like, wow, this is cool, and it's like really engaging. And now on something totally different. This is Forza Horizon 5, a game called The Eliminator. I'm just gonna let this play in the background. And so this is one of the best constructions of narrative arcs in a time period that's about 10 minutes. Okay, so when Battle Royale, a little bit ago, Battle Royale games were very popular. This is like PUBG and Fortnite are examples. If you don't play games, The Hunger Games is essentially a Battle Royale. And somebody's like, hey, we have a game about cars. Should we make a Battle Royale? And somebody was like, are you what? Like, it's about cars. Well, how do you have a Battle Royale with cars? And somebody's like, no, we got this. So it drops in this giant open world, and you start with a shitty car, and you could find slightly less shitty cars and sometimes very good cars around the world, and then you like hunt around for other people to race, and then you race them, and they might have found a better car than you, or they might not, and then you drive somewhere on the map. And you have to do things like avoid trees, and sometimes you follow the roads, and sometimes you don't follow the roads, and you get to know this giant open world, and you're like, okay, cool, so we sort of go somewhere. And the way it comes together is you're like, each little moment is having this, you're like second to second, you're looking at the map and figuring out where the person is, like there's a goal, I can see that, there's a car on the horizon, I might be able to do this. And you're like, okay, the races are lasting like around a minute, and then trying to figure out, and like on the 10-minute cycle is like where the entire game takes place. And so like you're doing each of these little tiny loops surrounded by this thing, the area keeps shrinking, there's like pushing everybody together, forcing them to fight, and by fight you mean driving each other and trying to avoid hitting, running into things. It's like, I don't know, it's the one time in my life that I've won this event, I looked at my watch and my heart rate was 153 from just sitting on the couch. So in terms of creating narrative engaging pacing is good. Also, I brought this up because I think it's a really interesting thing, sort of a lot of what this talk is about is like, what does it have to do with art? Sure, maybe it's a fun game. But it hits on all of these timescale things that I'm talking about, and it also is an unlikely combination of game mechanics in like, a battle royale with cars is like not an obvious choice. And possibly like looking at how fatuis and like game onboarding relate to interactive art might not be an active choice, but like stealing from other disciplines is something I do a ton, and I highly advocate doing, and this is like a great example of stealing from another discipline to like make something that turned out to be incredible. Cool, now we're at the hour mark. It's pretty rare to get meaningful, deep interaction. I found like an hour long in just an art piece because like it's hard to spend that much time with a piece in many cases. And so that's just like, but thinking about what that might look like, I found to be helpful. People are reflecting on, I sort of mentioned this with the Terrell piece a bit, but reflecting on themselves and how they relate to the world and what the systems are. It's an experience, not just a moment. And also this can be broken up in different times. Like, I don't think I've actually ever sat with Touchtone, which is the piece I'm going to talk about, which is mine, which is actually back there. I'll talk about it more. There's more than an hour at a time when I wasn't working on it, but I've used it well over an hour, and other people have used it, and you get to learn something. You can also watch people use things that helps add to that time, see what their novel experience is, see how they process it over a longer period of time, and like, what is it like to become an expert in this? Wait a second, I just realized, no, sorry, I forgot my talk. I'm all set, I haven't skipped something. Great. Okay, so for me, the example that I'm gonna end off is one of the most powerful art experiences I've ever had. It's the Temple at Burning Man. It has many different incarnations. They make a different one each year. And if you haven't experienced this, it is a giant structure where people write messages to those they've lost, essentially. People also write messages to themselves, parts that they feel that they've lost or parts that they want to lose. It is fundamentally about loss and grief, but also about renewal and moving forward. It is it exudes gravity. You get closer to the piece and the world just gets quieter. Burning Man is not a quiet place, but like this place has quiet just sort of built into it. It's very powerful. And so this is the 2012 temple at night. And I'm also picking this because it is, everything else I've showed is digital. This is not digital at all, but it is still fundamentally like one of the most interactive pieces I've ever seen, and like the interaction that everybody is creating is what makes the entire piece feel what it is. And so, video, it gets burned down on the last day of the event, and so all the messages that people have written and all the memorabilia that they've left behind it all gets burned on the last day. And it is the only time in my life I've like listened to like 50,000 people being silent at the same time. It has a lot of gravity. And these are the sort of things that people leave. There's like short, long, sometimes impromptu, sometimes not. And this is, I've never spent less than an hour there. Is you walk around, you read things, you have little moments, you like experience stories, you might leave your own. And so this piece also hits all those little things. It's a little less clear about how the like sub-second timing on this works, but once it's drawn you in, the like time that it takes to read something, the time that it takes to really engage with something, the time it takes you to write your own, and then like walk around and explore is like, this is interactive art. No digital, no electronics, but it's still interactive art that I think hits these timelines. That's that. And now I'm going to take a moment to talk about some pieces that I've done that I think some of them work and some of them don't, and so I'm going to like critique my own pieces and sort of talk about how I got there.
Yes, there was a question, I think. Was there a question over here?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
There was, I'll catch you.
Cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
So this is one of my favorite videos of Touchstone, which is a mother and daughter playing with it at Figment on the Greenway in Boston. I spent a long time, so after the piece, you can play with it back there. I like brought it here to set it up, and yeah, trying to figure out how to get it to respond really, really fast was important because I could get the swelling notes, but I wanted to have a really, really instantaneous response so people could mess with it, and it took a lot of learning and trial and error, but I think I eventually got it. And I tried to have enough depth that you could invest in. So this is actually a video that was pre-pandemic Tech Poetics, which was, they put together people that make musical instruments and brought in a live jazz band so people could jam out with their tech creations with musicians who were playing non-created instruments. And so I was just really happy to be involved with this and get a chance to do this. And this is like, I know how to use this piece. The person I'm comparing with has never used it before, but like gets more familiar and comfortable with it. And at this point, the back and forth with musicians is like trying to create something that lasts more than like touch bing. Like it's, yeah. So it was the attempt to try to hit those time scales. It doesn't really, in my opinion, live that much more than like past 10 minutes. It's a little bit hard to see how this piece succeeds, but I think sub 10 minute, it's like pretty okay. Here's another piece that I'm going to talk about. I'm always terrible at documentation, and I searched forever, and I could not find any videos of this piece. Sorry. It's a piece that I'm actually taking a second crack at for the New Alliance September show, interestingly, which is partly why I'm talking about it now. Because the first iteration was 2 different users put pulse oximeters on their fingers. It detects their heart rates. The heart rates are rendered as pond ripples in a virtual pond. Got a big ass projector, projected it into the trees, put some seats down, people could show up and watch their heartbeats ripple through the trees that are subtly moving with the breeze, and so you get all these, like the ripple of the wind that you can feel on your skin, and the different heart rate of the person that you're sitting next to, and I was pretty happy with that moment. Does it work on any sort of sub-second time framing? No. It takes at least 5 seconds for the pulse ox to even figure out that you're a person. So it has no immediate responsive visceral reaction at all. I had to man this piece, or else it just sat there completely unused. I was like, hello, do you want to come try this? Put this on your finger. Now, wait. Yes, you have a pulse. Just give it a second. And so it wasn't good at onboarding people at all. So I had to do that myself. And then also after 10 seconds, you've seen your heart rate. You're like, the person has a different. We don't have that great control of our heartbeats. You can run around to speed them up, but not when you're tethered to a wired pulse oximeter. You can't. So telling people not to do jumping jacks with the wire was also another important feature of being there. And so I made this thing that I thought was had the possibility of being compelling, but it existed only in the 10 to 20 second block, and then it didn't hit anything before that, and it didn't hit anything after that. And I think that that's why I want to take another crack at this, because when I made this, I didn't have the lens that I'm talking to you about now. And so I'm going to see how well I can apply this lens to that piece, see if I can make it better. And the last one. This is, I'll show you in a second, another Burning Man piece. This is an art car built on a Humvee chassis with 4 propane cannons on the top. I did the fire control system and some of the plumbing for it, and it's fun. Yeah, so it's over the top, wonderful. So that is not actually, because I also do music reactive stuff. That was before I did that. That's somebody just manually being flame jockey and just pushing all the things like this. Yeah.
It's a real job.
Yeah. So obviously for this to work, we're needing to deal with sub-second responses. The control interface was actually a Super Nintendo controller that we got to hand to random participants. And so you're here's the controller. It's how do you use it? It's here's the control. And so people push any button and fire shoots out. And this, if that was all we did, everybody would have been ecstatic. Because it's a little bit slower because it takes the time for the solenoid valve to actually open and all the propane to get down to the end of the tube. So there's a teeny bit of the delay, but the delay is still sub-second, so it's still fast enough to make people feel very connected with it. Beyond that, realizing you can sort of mess with it, each of the 4 cannons are controlled independently with different buttons, so there's some depth. And what I think was really fun is that a friend of mine, Bandit, was the self-appointed fire jockey for the entire weekend when nobody else was using it, and basically got extraordinarily good at modulating all of the different flame effects with things knowing how much is left in the tanks to make big fire bursts and when to fire one cannon versus the other and how to actually that was they went deep on learning how everything went, and you could see the difference between the 2 interactions. One's boom, boom, just rock out the beat, and the one is well, how do you capture swells and make the fire bigger and smaller? And so there's trying to figure out how to have enough depth that it's not just done and over. So that is my talk about timescales, interactive art, and pulling from video games, cognitive science, and user interface design, because we make things that users use. So, yeah, questions?
Do you ever just enjoy things anymore, or is this always critiquing your head?
It does mess with that. It's actually, yeah. It's actually it definitely has that problem of anytime I'm going to gallery spaces or using Unearth, there's the critique part of my brain won't shut off. It's interesting that actually sort of why I stopped playing video games. I barely play them anymore because I spent so long working on them that by the time I got done working on them, I just wanted to watch TV where I didn't have to make any decisions other than what to watch. And once I've decided on it, it's this show sucks, but I don't want to make any more choices. So I'm just gonna so yeah, it has that problem. For sure it has that problem.
So oftentimes we come up with constructs of how we explain things after we make them.
Yeah.
As we sort of understand why it is that we do them. I'm wondering, these timescale concepts, did you discover them in some other area and bring them to your art? Or were you making art and trying to bring meaning to it? This is how you found this way of this concept?
I brought it to art after the fact from games. I was already messing around with some like interactive art, but I didn't apply this lens, and I was trying to figure out why some things worked and some things didn't. And then watching like being assigned to work on like a TUI for a game and like getting all the data about how people just dropped off so quickly also gave me an interesting idea. It was like, oh, we're doing user testing in games. I want to do user testing on my art. And so I'd like bring somebody to my art and be like, hey, how do they use it? And then it was like pretty obvious, like this is a terrible experiment from like a cognitive science perspective, is like to like watch someone use it. It like obviously is changing how they're interacting with it. So this is what has led me on multiple occasions, like a creep, hiding in the bushes, watching people use my art where they can't see me. Because that's the only way I found to understand how people use it without the pressure of like me being there. Because I'm like, hey, use it, and they're like this. And if I like other pieces that I worked on, I'd like hide in the bushes and watch people, and they just walk past it and like totally not get engaged. Whereas my friends are like, oh, this is so good, you did a great job, I can see all these things. And like, but like, I never saw anybody else using it. When I like hid in the bushes and watched it, it was because it didn't catch them at first. And I was like, what? Okay, why are they not missing it? Why does it change like that? And so like it was after watching things succeed and fail and trying to articulate them that I like recognized as like, this is the same thing. What have people written about that? Like give me more theory to like break it down into a useful thing, as opposed to like the first thing I was like, it needs to be more responsive. But there's a lot more depth to that, so yeah.
Do you feel like, as far as onboarding is concerned, like limiting people's ability, like limiting the sort of total set of interactions that someone can reasonably do with a piece versus not doing that, does that factor into their sort of effectiveness and in like these different time scales?
Yeah, totally. I have so far never managed to make any art that adds features later, but I've definitely worked on games that add features later, and that vastly improves how people, like, if you give them the entire full UI, they get overwhelmed, or you give them little parts of it, and it increases retention. People, like, get good at that part, and then you unlock a new part, and, like, this is pretty typical. Did that answer your question?
I mean, I'm less talking about, like, adding things over time, and more like the difference between, like, a Super Nintendo game where like, literally all you have is like 10 buttons or 12 buttons, and a VR game where you can literally pick anything up and throw it outside of your ability to, you know, like get it.
Yeah.
Versus and like how that sort of broad spectrum of like sort of inherently constrained like total set of interactions that someone can do versus, you know, like not, how that like affects like difficulty of making an effective like game loop or interactive loop.
Yeah, and definitely if you have the more open world and like more open the controls are, like in VR you could like wave your hands around and do a lot of different things, but what is the game even going to respond to? Because it doesn't respond to everything.
Yeah.
And trying to like organizing tasks where you give somebody a very clear instruction at the beginning. It was like, here's an action that you can take that will have an effect.
Yeah.
And then probably do that a couple more times before you let them try and figure it out, because that gives them some rough context.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, the more, but like, modern game controllers, way more buttons. Like, modern interfaces that are like touch interfaces, theoretically anything is touchable. Like, like you need to breadcrumb those more because you have to, because otherwise everything is possible.
Yeah, the thing that I forgot until now that made me think about this was like the idea of like if you have say a game on like a Super Nintendo, you can theoretically make every button do a thing.
Yes.
So like you could have any possible interaction have an immediate response. But as you go into like the hundreds of possible things that any person can do at any given time, you cannot give anything. Like there are plenty of things that you can do in a VR game that you're just not going to do.
Yeah, totally.
So I guess breadcrumbing is your your
give them like show them several things that they can concretely do, and then give them a task where they need to do those things that you just taught them to do, and then add stuff later. But like, and then or they discover stuff on their own in the process just incidentally, but you don't require them to do something to figure something out that you haven't told them. And then, like, some people just love exploring things and they just like ignore it, just go off the rails immediately and just like wave their hands around until they discover what to do or not. And yeah, and ideally you support both of those because some people don't like being told what to do. And you're like, sure, go over there, wave your hands around until something happens.
My favorite example of this is the first like accounting game, because like it'll give you the little in-game VR headset, and if you pick it up and you just chuck it, it'll be like, don't do that again, and then it'll give you another one. And if you do it again, it's like, okay, fuck it, that's the game, and it just shuts down. You just literally exit the game and have to turn it back on, and it's like
That's fantastic.
that I experienced like fucking 10 years ago, and I still think about it like once a month.
That's
great.
phenomenal.
It's fantastic. Don't be afraid to literally turn things off.
Yeah.
Do you take into account like second order experience, like experiencing other people's experience?
Oh yeah.
The art piece. So for example, the flames thing, there was like the 10 second to 1 minute interaction is like well, like that's one component where someone can walk and control it.
Yeah.
But then if someone's learned how to play it compellingly, then that's something that fills in, say, like the 10 minute to out. Like someone might sit around watching someone do it well.
Yeah.
For a while, for example.
Yeah, the watching other people is definitely a really neat part because sometimes people figure out things that you might not have thought of. Other times there's just like the joy of like watching people discover something for the first time, and like if there's also the possibility of doing it yourself, like people are like, oh, can I do that? And it's like, yeah, there's the line over there. Get in line for your turn with the controller. Yes.
How do you encourage collaboration, like with the sort of for the select? It's like, you know, because each person is sort of on their own time scale.
Do you mean collaboration as a creator or collaboration with another like user?
Multiple people interacting with their work simultaneously, sort of piggybacking.
Yeah. It's trickier. Like the piece back there, touch tone, is like one person can go up and hit both handles and immediately control it. Whereas if there's two people, it's a little bit more awkward. It doesn't like figure it out quite as much. I've like watched other people try things with similar technology where they put the handles far enough apart that one person can't touch it. It really risks not being discovered at that point because it doesn't have something unless you coordinate. I think it's fundamentally the same, just like review options, watching what happens in those time scales when there's more people to use. It makes it all harder because if you see an interaction that's suboptimal, it's less clear how to address it. But I think that the same lens applies to watching people get it because both people are going to get frustrated if nothing's happening in about the same time that one person gets frustrated because one people, yeah. They might have slightly more tolerance for that because they're engaging with a friend and that's providing some of the feedback loop. But it's not, in my experience, it's not that different.
In your opinion, what makes interactive art different than games? And if you want to engage your viewers or users beyond the 10-minute hour time frame, how do you prevent it from turning into?
Those are great questions. I actually don't see that much of a difference in terms of like the core what's going on here. It's sort of degrees and practically speaking, often medium is like, if it's on a screen with a controller, it's probably going to be a game. But there's like games like Journey and Flower. I should pick a different game studio as opposed to name your two. But either way, like those are just amazing art pieces. Like I think that they function brilliantly as art pieces, and they are also games, but they tap into something deeper than just something like that. And so I don't think there's as clear a dividing line. But like if I'm making something that exists away from the screen, do I think of it as a game or like interactive art? Like part of what this talk is about is like I don't care. I think it's useful to think about both the same way. And how do you engage people longer than that? It depends a lot on like the environment in which you're installing. Like I think that if you're installing something that's going to be a semi-permanent installation, you have the option of thinking about something beyond that. So like, one of the things I'm thinking about is like a semi-permanent installation. You might want to like think about how it changes with the seasons. If it's a one-day event, you are maxed out on what you can do. And I think that like that's where I start thinking about which timescales are appropriate. And it's more just like, is there anything you can add that extends that longevity that's appropriate for the like site-specificness of the installation? If that sort of answers your question.
Kind of jumping off that, also like a tool as different from game interactive art.
Oh yeah.
Because it seems like the fire kind of turned into a tool.
It sort of did. Yeah, like it sort of was like.
Yeah.
Its control scheme is deterministic.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit different than touchdown. And so at some point you're like, oh, is this an instrument? Like, is an instrument a tool, like a musical instrument, is that a tool, or is that, it has a different word, is it an instrument? Like, is this art in and of itself, or like, do you make art with it? Golly, I don't know. But it's a good question.
What do you factor in for 3D content?
Oh yeah, that's a lot of things. This question is like really big because it's really easy to fail there. It's like I'll just share an example of like how I didn't do this right for Touchdown. So like I had this in Alliance, like the new Alliance thing, and it's a gallery space, which it turns out makes people a little bit more ambivalent about just touching things and grabbing them and shaking them. I was used to like burner links where nobody has any compunction about doing that. And so I watched somebody stand in front of my piece and look at it for 15 seconds. Like it's sort of like really contemplating, sort of moving their head around, and it's like shit, I fucked up. The other thing that I did, which was like totally a mistake, was because there's a lot of audio pieces, I had headphones, and I was like, oh, I've got these two metal posts. I should just hang the headphones on those because those are convenient holders because they're already part of my piece. That was a really big mistake because it made the core interactive pieces look like headphone holders, and since they already had a function, people didn't think to interact with them because they already had a job. And so it was like, that was a really big mistake in terms of discoverability because it was like, I didn't think about that at all when I was setting it up. I was like, it needs headphones, okay, cool. I accidentally built headphone holders so that means it's done. And then people didn't interact with them at all. And so I had to like consistently move them there. And then I think that the gallery owners like tried to put them back each night. And so I was like, no, the headphones need to be on the side because it really reduces the discoverability of the piece. And so those are just like some of the experiences of watching people discover something. If you've got motion sensors, point them at people so that when they're approaching the piece, they can see the response. Because if you have any sort of lag and it's about passing the piece, the light happens when the person's when it's already past the person, and unless it's at night and it glows on enough that they're going to catch it in the peripheral vision, they're not even going to know it's interacting with it because you're a half second too late. And so just aim things different ways to be like, show somebody that they're doing something. It's a great question. I feel like it's its own topic, but I hope that helps a little bit to think about how to implement.
Do you have any, I love from the learning from your stories, do you have any insights of this kind of time way of experiencing things, but for people of different ages, like children experience certain times, do they
Yeah.
pay attention? Yes.
This is going to surprise everyone. Children have short attention spans. I feel like a lot of the higher order things, possibly past like a minute, are often like we saw a kid using touch tone, and like one of the things I like about that is that like kids can come up and use it and play with it and explore it. They don't stay as long as adults. They just want to like go on to the next thing often. And then I think I actually watched then there's like a difference where like one kid just decided he liked it and just stayed there for like an hour. And so that's the best answer I have, but like, yeah, it's definitely different. I think that like the goals of like having deep, meaningful, like philosophical interactions is like a little bit different, but like it sure makes them happy. But like kids love things that do things. Like you're like, I hit this and made a noise, and you're like, please stop that. You're like, I hit this and made a noise. It's interactive art. It's fantastic.
So like, kind of as like a difference between games and like more interactive art. In my experience, like interactive art is kind of like you experience it, you have your experience, and then you leave. Whereas games, like there's much more of an opportunity to you experience it, you leave, you come back, you leave, you come back. And that isn't necessarily like you can make an item and you can give it to someone, and then they can put it on their table, and then they can pick it up, and then you put it back down, and then pick it up. So as far as like the longer time scales, where you were talking like hour plus, whereas rare, how does like stacked time experiences sort of play into like even less than the hour? Like how does multiple times coming back and coming back?
Yeah, I think that's where the interpersonal part really comes in, sort of like relating to the question is like, you find something, you like it, and you bring back somebody else who hasn't experienced it. And like sharing that is an important part of that. That's, at least in my own experience, it's a good thing to think about. That's the main way that I see people coming back and using a piece, is that like they like the experience, it's collaborative to some degree, they bring back somebody else and like watch them experience it for the first time and like have some joy and like have their own interaction with the person if they can collaborate, or just like, even if it's not, just like show it to them and be like, check out this thing. And like that sort of answers part of that question.
I just want to add a comment to that. Proficiency. So if you go back, if there's a discoverability element where you can become proficient in interacting with the artwork, where you learn how to do it better, then going back has that element.
But that sort of brings it back to the tool skills.
Yeah. If like the closer it is to a tool, the more that you have proficiency, which is more about like the person who is like fire jockeying the thing is like, yeah. So that's a proficiency is one of the other things. Cool.
Just one more thought, I guess.
Yeah.
About like the different categories of interactive art. I think there's also like a ritual. Like, you know? Like the temple is like a ritual.
Yeah.
Almost. And that's like an interactive thing. There's also a group thing. And the interactive makes it ritualistic and a spiritual aspect. So I don't know. Yeah.
But it's also a thing you come back to every year.
Yeah. Those are all meaningful, and because a lot of pieces that I make, if I make them and I like them, I keep bringing them different places. And so like there's like some of you have already played Touch In before, and some of you maybe haven't, and so you get to try it. And I decided to stop my thinking at about an hour for this talk so that I didn't get too lost. But like, great question, thank you. So I think that covers it,
I arrived late, so I didn't see the beginning. So in the spirit of experiencing things in different time scales, would you please go back to the very beginning and spend exactly a quarter second for
Yes, okay. We'll go. Sometimes it's like, it goes fast, like the later. 1 second, it goes up, like the light orchestra, but like a little slower. 10 seconds, spacing, lots of shouting. 1 minute, slightly more calm, something happens. It's birds, they're cool. 10 minutes, light is really neat, and you can just think about it for like 10 minutes. Cars are fast. An hour, things to be meaningful, done.
Not bad you took so long with the first one.
Cool, thank you all.
We have just one more slide, and then we'll probably go right over to aeronautics.